Ladies and gentlemen, good morning in Greece, good afternoon at TSINGHUA University. Today, we have the privilege and the great honor to present the 5th Themistocles Award to a prominent professor from TSINGHUA University, Mr. Yan Xuetong. I am Konstantina Botsiou, I'm the Vice Chair of the Department of International and European Studies. I will be talking to you later on about the great academic achievements of Professor Yan, but now let me pass the word to Professor Athanasios Platias, an authority in the study of Thucydides and Themistocles, about whom we are going to talk later a bit more. And he was the chair of the department when the decision was taken for the presentation of this award. Professor Platias.
Good morning from Piraeus. I'm delighted to join this panel to honor Professor Yan. We have many reasons that we want to honor Professor Yan, but in my mind, and Konstantina, you will explain this reason during your presentation, but in my mind, the first and foremost reason is that he brought back the leadership in international relations theory. That's a major achievement because international relations theory has completely underestimated the law of leader and concentrates either on structural forces at the international level or at the domestic level. Let me try to explain why we give this prize to with the name of Themistocles. Themistocles, in my mind, is the greatest leader that Greece ever produced. And actually, that was what Thucydides said. Thucydides, in his history, characterized it with the Greek word kratistos, which means the best of the existing leader in his history. It's neither Pericles, the leader of Athens, it's neither Hermocrates, the leader of the Syracusans, it's neither Archidamos, or it's Themistocles. Looking at the text of Thucydides, he characterizes Themistocles with some of the following characteristics. Foresight. He could see things that will eventually come. Vision. He has the vision for his city-state, for his community. Prudence, sharpness, quick judgment, improvisation, quick decision-making, ability to persuade his people, the democratic demos, in direct democracy, something very difficult, to persuade his diplomatic allies and also his enemies. And Thucydides concludes that he provided the optimal solution to all kinds of strategic problems that Athens faced. In other words, it was the strategic genius of the 5th century. 25 centuries later, Henry Kissinger, a professor of international relations and also a practitioner for diplomacy, wrote this year a book, Leadership, 6 Studies in World Strategy. In this book, Kissinger characterized leaders in 2 basic categories. The managerial leaders, statesmen that are managerial. These statesmen usually manipulate circumstances rather than overwhelmed by them. That's what Kissinger said. And try to maximize the interest of their countries. The second type of statesman, the second type of leader is the visionary, the transformative leader, a leader that redefines what appears possible. And Kissinger tried to apply this model to 6 world leaders of the 20th century. He came to the conclusion that it's very difficult to combine both. But looking in ancient history, Kissinger found out that in ancient times, the optimal blend between the managerial statement and the visionary statement among the ancients was exemplified by Themistocles. Kissinger knows one or two things about statesmen. So the fact that another important diplomat and professor came 25 centuries after Thucydides, making more or less the same judgment, it's really fascinating. That's why I characterize Themistocles as the greatest leader that Greece produced. You see, in time, there are times that just managing the status quo is the riskiest strategy. And this is especially true in times of war, crisis, technological change, economic disruptions. And the Athenians, 25 centuries ago, they faced such a grave situation, a grave threat. The Persian Empire had a single-minded purpose. Athens must be destroyed. And they came to Greece in order to destroy Athens and to occupy the rest of the Greek city-states. Now, we should understand the level of magnitude. I mean, the Persian Empire started in India, included Central Asia. It came up to Europe. It came in Asia Minor, part of Thrace, Egypt, and Libya. I mean, it was a collection of empires, 4 empires under the Persian. The Medians, the Lydians, the Babylonians, and the Egyptians. So, and they came with a single purpose, to destroy Athens. So between the destruction of Athens and the victory of the Persians, there is one great statesman standing, Themistocles. He saved Athens and the Greek city-states from Persia. And as Victor Hanson from Stanford University remarked, the efforts, and I quote, the efforts of a single individual saved Western civilization in its formative stage. We all know that after the victory of Themistocles in Salamis, the golden age of Athens started, the golden age of the Western civilization, that it's the foundation of the Western civilization up to now. So according to Hanson, if Greece was destroyed at that time, the Western civilization would have been destroyed at its very birth. Now, Themistocles, the leader of Athens at that time, provided to the Athenians a theory of victory against a huge and formidable empire. That's not an easy task. Most of the other Greek states understood that there is no way to defeat the Persians, so they bandwagoned to the Persians. They gave them earth and water and became part of the Persian Empire. But Themistocles generated a theory of victory, generated a strategy in order to defeat the formidable Persian Empire. But it was not only ideas, it was also action. He generated resources. He built a huge fleet. He manned the fleet. He generated alliances. So he multiplied the Athenian resources, but most importantly, implemented the strategy. And to implement such a strategy, it needed a revolution. The Athenians were tied to their lands. So he had to break the relation of the city and the land and direct them into the sea. And actually, he took, when the Persians invaded Greece, a paradoxical decision. He let his city in the hands of Persians to be destroyed in order to save it. And that's actually what happened. The Persians destroyed an empty city, but the Athenians were next door fighting their ships and managed to beat the Persians, send them home, and regain the city and build it again. The second revolution was domestic. It was really the landed aristocracy that was running Athens. And at that time, in order to mobilize the Athenians, it had to make a political revolution. And in this political revolution, he gave rights to the poorer, landless people in Athens, and that way he drafted them into the navy. I mean, in the Battle of Marathon, only 9,000 Athenians were fighting. But in the ships in Salamis, 40,000 Athenians were fighting. In order to mobilize all the domestic potential, he changed essentially the domestic structure of Athens. He empowered democracy. That's a democratic revolution that he sprang domestically. To cut the long story short, he turned democracy in a strategic weapon. Then, when it came to the battle, he picked the right time and the right place in Salamis 25 centuries ago, and we had one of the first cases that the David beats Goliath, big way. So his first achievement is essentially saving Athens and saving Athens and the rest of Greece for the present. But his second achievement was that in this victory, he built the Athenian Empire. He built all the elements of the Athenian power, navy. But you see, navy is not just the ships. It's an economic and maritime ecosystem that supports the ships. It's the mobilization of the ships, the mobilization of manpower. But this manpower and the ships were expensive. So he had to create new financial instruments in order to be able to have a fleet operating. So his basic accomplishment is that he turned an agricultural city into the sea and make it a maritime superpower. But again, it's not enough to mobilize the manpower and send them in the ships. You have to teach them, and to teach them statesmanship. And statesmanship, it became really the art of the city. The Athenians created an empire, not only because they had the ships, but because they had the art of statesmanship. And through a ship, manpower, financial resources, and seamanship, managed to create thalassocracy. Thalassocracy means control of the sea. By controlling the sea, created an area of globalization in ancient Athens, in Eastern Mediterranean and the Black Sea, where trade flourished and then wealth created. And this wealth was again invested in the ships. He took a navy needs ports, and he created the port of Piraeus, 3 ports. One of them has been leased a decade ago to a Chinese company, Costco.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Aris. How are you?
I am good.
So you solved apparently the technical problems. I'm trying to complete the presentation of the logic of Themistocles award, and then you will join the discussion. Then he made a major project of geopolitical engineering. By walling Athens and Piraeus, by making 45 walls, he transformed Athens from an agricultural city to an island. That's a major accomplishment of geopolitical engineering. So in other words, and then, and most importantly, he offered protection to the other Greek states, mostly in the Aegean and Asia Minor, and he received tribute. That way, more resources went to the navy. In other words, Themistocles created a virtuous cycle that navy brings resources and also bring allies, brings empire. The empire brings more resources. trade brings more resources. This is invented to the navy, and then a virtuous cycle starts, which propelled the power of Athens. It was this momentum that Themistocles created that Thucydides explained in his Pentecontidia, the 50 years between the Persian Wars and the Peloponnesian War, that this strategic momentum that Themistocles generated by building the resources, building the momentum that Pericles continued, it was precisely that threatened Sparta and became one of the causes of the Peloponnesian War. So the Thucydides trap, which is a kind of catchword right now, to a very large extent, is related to the power resources and the momentum that Themistocles created. And really, this kind of maritime culture, it's still here in Greece. I mean, Greece, a small nation of 11 million, the Greek ship owners control 21% of the world maritime fleet. And about 60% of the EU maritime fleet. So this culture of seamanship, this turn to the sea that started 25 years ago, it's still present in Greece today. So our university, for all these reasons, is honoring Themistocles, and is honoring in two ways. First, we have this Themistocles Award series, and we are delighted that the fifth recipient is Professor Yan, and Professor Botsiou will explain why. And second, yesterday we nominated our biggest and newest campus of the University of Piraeus as the Themistocles campus. That's how the University of Piraeus is honoring the greatest statesman that Greece ever produced. Thank you very much, and I'm really delighted that the fifth Themistocles Award goes to Professor Yan. Aris, would you like to join us?
Yes, I had a technical problem, so apologies for that. It does happen, and it has happened before during the Robert Jervis Award, and I'll say a few more words. So apologies but it was really technical, and but now it's up and running. There are a few things that I want to say about the Themistocles Award. One is that it's many ways the creator of this award was Professor Platias. It was during a trip to Israel, as we were on the plane, that he came up with the idea. I witnessed that, and he came up with the idea, and then it was actually actualized. So this is actually an important thing, because ideas and deeds are really what is behind statesmanship. Statesmanship is about action, but it's also about knowing what to do. You cannot have statesmanship if you do not have a clear concept, a clear idea of where you're moving, if you do not understand the grand strategy, if you do not understand the contemporary environment. In other words, statesmanship awards, in our view, the view of our department, go both to men and women of action, but also men and women of thought. Thinking is as important as action, because without that, we cannot have any award. And we have actually balanced this in a way that I think is very fair and very interesting. For example, as I heard before, we have recipients of this award have been Paul Ray. Probably Professor Ray is the leading expert on ancient Sparta. And he talked about ancient grand strategy in Sparta, but also Minister Avramopoulos, who was a member of, he was a foreign minister, defense minister, commissioner in the European Union, mayor of Athens, a man of action. The general secretary of Mr. Kenimatas, a diplomat, general secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Greece, of the presidency of Greece, ambassador to Turkey, ambassador to Portugal. Again, a man of action who, by the way, just produced a book, again, bridging what we think is very important, thought and action. And Robert Jervis is a very interesting case on this because he received this award, one of the leading international relations theorists. And the Themistocles, he recently passed away, and we were informed by his family that the Themistocles Award is prominently displayed in his honor at Columbia University, which actually shows the recognition not only of Professor Jervis, but also of this award. So this is the way that we view this, an award that goes out to leading thinkers, to leading practitioners. And the way that, and it's Professor Platias' baby, so to speak. So the way that we see this is that we will and are branching out throughout the world. So to have someone like you, Yan Xuetong, a person who is a leader in thought, is exactly what honors us. It honors us because we recognize through you and through your work that a statesmanship award not only goes to a man, in this case, of thinking, of deep thinking, but also of a person who guides men of action. But also, we are based in Piraeus. But the thing about Themistocles, the thing about the ancient Athenians, the thing about ancient Greece was that it was never local. It was never parochial. It really was the basis for something that became global. And again, we are deeply honored by the fact that we are now branching out to someone from China, a nation that is actually one of the handful of nations like the Greeks, maybe a little bit more populous, that goes back thousands of years. Very few nations in this planet can say that they go back. And this was my final point, I think it's very almost touching, the fact that we give a statesmanship award for Themistocles, but in this case in particular, we are joining with another ancient nation, and it so much that unites us, never had problems, and this is just a manifestation and a recognition that nations and thinking, in some cases, have continuity that spans more than 2.5, 3,000 years. And I think this is just perfect. I really also want to thank, and again, apologies for the technical problems, but I really want to thank Professor Botsiou, who recently joined our department, but is taking us with a storm and is so hardworking to make sure that our events go well. Everyone at the department, but my mentor, Professor Platias, because let me stress again, this is his idea. He actually came up with this, and again, he came up with it and he delivered. So this is exactly what we are thinking is the best example of statesmanship. This is a special day for everyone here at Piraeus and at our department and at your university. It is really and truly special. Again, we are presenting an award, but in a sense, we are the ones who are the recipients of a great honor today. And I cannot stress this enough. In other words, by accepting this award, you honor our university, but you also honor a tradition of thinking, of action that unites and unites again nowadays two ancient nations that are coming back at different levels and in different ways, but are certainly coming back and making their mark in global society. So thank you very much. And again, apologies for the technical issue on my behalf.
Konstantina, I suggest that you now present the reasons that why Professor Yan was awarded this prize.
Thank you very much, Professor Platias. I will try now to present the reasons why Professor Yan more than deserves the Themistocles Award by picking some achievements from a very long list of accomplishments. All these reasons were also reflected in the unanimous decision of the department that was taken for this award upon a proposal, of course, by Professor Platias, who is also the mastermind behind the Themistocles award, as Professor Tziampiris earlier said. Now, Professor Yan is first of all one of the top political scientists in the world. He's one of the 100 top global thinkers, not only according to the journal Foreign Policy in 2008, but because of his overall achievements. He's one of the most cited Chinese researchers, and something very rare, he has created a theory, a new theory, namely moral realism, which proved groundbreaking for IR in the world. Professor Yan also supports the borderless nature of science, which is very important for us in Greece and for everybody in the world. And he finds common strategic values in different eras and in different civilizations. This leads him indispensably to Thucydides, who is central to some modern IR analysis. He stresses the importance of leadership and of alliances based on authority rather than coercion, hence being also a researcher of Themistocles, whom Thucydides praises as a leader, as you all listened before by Professor Platias in his wonderful analysis. Actually, as of yesterday, a central building of the University of Piraeus is officially named after Themistocles. So his fame is keep going. Professor Yan recognizes that people are amalgams of rational choice and emotion, something that we stress very often in history, but sometimes it goes unnoticed. People are amalgams of rational choice and emotions, negative and positive emotions. But particularly for bad decisions, he traces the sources in negative emotions like arrogance or lust for power, something we call pleonexia. You will also find it in ancient texts. Last but not least, Professor Yan bridges Chinese with Western strategic thought, which also makes him an expert in US-China relations. I mention only a few of his positions. He is president of Carnegie China, vice president of the China Association of American Studies, chief editor of the Chinese Journal of International Politics. Also, he's a member of the negotiation committee of the Chinese Department of Commerce and participates in the Chinese Union of Diplomacy. Now, please allow me to elaborate briefly on his achievements. To start with, Professor Yan changed the nature of TSINGHUA University, where you are all listening to us today. TSINGHUA is considered China's leading university and has some very famous alumni, like the current president, Xi Jinping, and his predecessor, President Hu Jintao. Yet, before Yan joined, it had specialized in natural sciences and engineering. When he returned from the US in the early 1990s, after excellent studies there, to a rather poor China at that time, he founded the IR department and opened the door to a path-breaking advancement of social sciences. So today, after all that period that elapsed, TSINGHUA is a comprehensive university and one of the world's top 20 institutions. In 2012, Professor Yan also founded at TSINGHUA the World Peace Forum, which cultivates strategic dialogue among Chinese and international political leaders, thinkers, and academics, serving China's international cooperation. Secondly, Professor Yan introduced Chinese classical corpus in modern IR. He made that great bridge that is very important for other ancient civilizations today. His findings were epitomized in his important book, Ancient Chinese Thought, Modern Chinese Power, which was published by Princeton University Press in 2011. He also argued against concepts of cultural exceptionalism and proposed the search for strategic principles in ancient texts outside China. In that direction, he strongly supported comparative research with Indian and with Greek texts of classical strategy. Professor Yan believes that science cannot receive national labels. There is no Chinese or American physics, but rather one physics. The same principle stands for IR. There may be some schools of thought, stressing particular methodologies like the English school or the Danish school, etc. But international relations is a scientific discipline that transcends national borders. Above all, we are scientists. His own school of thought is named TSINGHUA school, not Chinese school, and prioritizes leadership as the most important analytical variable for structural change in the international system. Leadership takes center stage in Professor Yan's theory of moral realism, which is fully developed in the book Leadership and the Rise of Great Powers, which was published by Princeton University Press in 2020. Yan draws from the ancient Chinese thinker Sun Tzu and develops a theory to evaluate hegemonic transition across cultures and time. His core argument is that domestic reform is a fundamental condition for hegemonic change, as reformist leadership creates an uneven growth of power because it's reformist. While prioritizing domestic reform, Yan's theory, on the other side, introduces a second condition, namely strategic credibility, that is the ability of an aspiring hegemonic power to establish alliances based on authority, rather than coercive subjugation. So reformist leadership creates an uneven growth of power, and this uneven growth of power leads it to international hegemony by authority. It is striking that at this, he coincides with the Greek historian Thucydides, who also stressed the importance of authority in alliances, and according to Thucydides, one of Themistocles' greatest accomplishments was his cultivation of the Athenian alliance system and the consequent advancement of Athens' strategic credibility. Themistocles himself reasoned that as the Athenians would liberate the Greeks of Asia, this would then turn in goodwill to the Athenians because of this benefaction. As a matter of fact, in the beginning, Athens' allies voluntarily handed over the command of the Hellenic alliance to the Athenians because of their hatred and their fear of the Spartan commander Pausanias, who acted despotically after the Persian Wars. So Athens enjoyed for many years the goodwill, the so-called evnia, by its allies, and that legitimized its superiority. Thucydides underlines the fact that the early alliance system of Athens was a hegemony, namely a voluntary alliance based on leadership, on Athenian leadership. But the Athenian pleonexia, its lust for power, eventually turned the hegemony into anarchy, namely a tyranny, which was imposed by the Athenians over other Greek city-states, and then they reacted to that. The Athenians lost the goodwill, the evnia, and were hated by the rest of Greece. So when the Spartans declared war against Athens in the beginning of the Peloponnesian War, 431 BCE, they pledged to liberate the Greeks from Athenian oppression this time. As Thucydides points out, and Professor Yan has stressed that, people's feelings were very much on the side of the Spartans. As the Peloponnesian War intensified, the Athenians further deteriorated their legitimacy among other Greek city-states. The massacre in Milos is a monument about that. It exacerbated other mistakes like imperial overstretch, demagogy, and pleonexia, of course, which was everywhere and led to the ultimate Athenian defeat. Thucydides is very critical of Alcibiades, for instance, because he believes that the problem with all that alliance was bad decision. The bad decisions of statesmen was the problem that led to an imprudent chain of decisions and in the end to Athens' downfall. So Thucydides was a strong advocate of what he called strategic prudence, sophrosini. Professor Platias has very often argued in favor of that. His appeal to prudence, a nurtured virtue, is the single most important term about leadership that can be found in Thucydides' work and is very hard to be followed by leaders, as we see over time. In fact, this virtue is not only Greek, it's found also in the Chinese classical corpus. Sunji, whom I mentioned before, noted a concept that parallels Sophrosini, and Professor Yan has used that thought in modern IR theory, in his own moral realism theory. I quote, "Plan before any undertaking. Carry it out with circumspection. Be as careful about the end as you are about the beginning, and then end and beginning will be alike. This is the most auspicious policy. The success of all undertakings rests upon circumspection. Their failure derives from negligence. Therefore, when circumspection prevails over negligence, over carelessness, the result will be good fortune. When carelessness prevails, the result will be annihilation. When planning prevails over personal desires, over voluntarism, the result will be progress. When personal desires prevail over planning, the result will be disaster." Sunji further advised leaders to be cautious and never neglectful in strategy, in undertakings, in dealings with officers, in the use of men, in regard to the enemy. These are called the 5 things that must not be neglected, and they concern both the internal and the external front. Sophrosini, as the amenity of fine leadership, was at the core of China's pre-Qin strategic thinkers. So Professor Yan's theory of moral realism is built upon a very rich theoretical understructure across cultures, across civilizations, but also China-based. It is striking that Greek and Chinese authors who lived in completely different, separate, interstate systems reached similar conclusions about leadership and strategic credibility. While this may not suffice to fully demonstrate that a universal code of strategy exists, it does allow us to extract strategic advice about leadership and hegemonic transition, how we can do it, how we can save ourselves from ourselves. This is the advice that has become immensely valuable today as China and the United States face an era of intensifying hegemonic competition, then Professor Yan's contribution is even more important than the academic course of his life shows. The intensity and struggle of that competition will not be determined by the structure of the international system, but, as he's also underlined, by the decisions of statesmen or stateswomen, where to go this or the other way. It is exactly in this dimension where Yan's theory of moral realism, with its emphasis on leadership, on fine leadership, based on domestic reform and authority abroad, becomes consequential as ever. So it is for all these reasons that Professor Yan Xuetong more than deserves the Themistocles Award. We hope that his future research will further advance Sino-Hellenic comparative strategic studies. We're very privileged that we have Professor Yan with us today receiving this award. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll pass the word to Professor Tziampiris again.
Thank you very much, Professor Botsiou. I think it's now time to ask Professor Trigas to present the award. And also, before we are waiting to hear a very interesting speech, of course, but there's something else. There's the award and a little extra thing that Professor Platias actually has secured. It's a coin of Themistocles. It's a silver coin that has been minted for the 2,500 years of the naval battle of Salamis. And I will actually tell Professor Platias to share what is the connection between a little piece of silver, Themistocles, the Themistocles Award. It's just too good. It's his thought, so he should share it with the group.
I suggest that Dr. Vasilis Trigas present the award and then explains the moment that he will give it to Professor Yan, how silver is connected not only in commemorating the victory of the Athenians, but also what is the strategic implication. Vasilis, go ahead.
Hello from Beijing. I'm very fortunate. I just happened to be here. It was not planned. And let me just explain the symbolism before bestowing the honor to you, Professor Yan. So this is the silver coin. At the front, you have the profile of Themistocles. At the back, we have the symbol of Greece, the emblem of Greece. And this is the award designed by the university. Now, the question is why this is all silver. When in 483 BCE, the Athenians discovered a very rich source of silver at the south of the city, at Lavrium. But there was a big debate about how to utilize that newly found wealth. So the aristocratic elements in the population said, let's spend the newly found silver on welfare. And by spending this on welfare, we can, legitimize our authority over the Greek population, the Athenian population, and prolong our privileges. Themistocles, because of his great foresight, had foreseen the Persian threat. The Persians will be back with vengeance. And he thought that it would make a better sense to spend wealth on cautious warfare. So he did manage to persuade the city. And it is with this silver that Athens built the triremes, about 100 ships, 483 BC. Just 3 years later, Athens used those vessels to defeat crush the Persian Empire at Salamis. Now, Professor Yan, 8 years ago, when I first came at Tsinghua, you gave a lecture, and you said, wealth is an important ingredient of state power. But at the end of the day, it's strategic agency, leadership that will decide how this wealth is going to be utilized strategically. And we can all imagine that had Themistocles failed to persuade the Athenians to use that wealth to build the vessels and crush the Persians, counter history would be very different. We would not have been here today. So that's a clear example of how leadership matters in decisions about strategy. Well, thank you, Professor.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. And this is just a wonderful moment. It also shows how global Greeks have always been. And now this is the time we've been waiting for. The floor is all yours. And we really await to hear your thoughts today. And maybe we'll have a little discussion afterwards.
Okay, thank you. And thanks to all of you attend this ceremony and this event. And before I deliver a short speech, I would like to introduce my colleagues and our PhD students. And certainly you have Vasily here. And then we have the faculties and from our department, and also the I do not introduce all of them one by one, but you can see. Okay, here. 李晨，你坐一下。Okay, good. 你转一圈。对，转一圈。So you can see we have about 20 people here, and half of them are faculty of our institute, and the other half are PhD students. They all have a great interest in IR theories. That's why they come to attend this event. Okay. Now, first, let me to thank Professor Botsiou and for your flattering introduction. And actually, I'm very, very deeply honored and to be the non-Western scholar to receive this prize. And just now we heard the introduction from Professor Platias and tell us and why this name Themistocles is important. And then we know why they use the Themistocles name for this award. And also we know the background from Professor Tziampiris about how do they the process and the background for them to considering to have this award for IR scholars, and also why they selected those IR series. And since the 1930s, I think the IR theoretical studies have been dominated first by European scholars, and then from the 1930s and dominated by American scholars. And today, the European scholars and the American scholars are still the most influential IR series and in this domain. And so that's why I'm really feel very honored as the very first non-Western scholar to receive this prize. And you arranged me and with this exemplary and Western scholars together. And so here, I know all of these your faculties of the department involved in this activity. So I highly appreciate and their support and to give the reward to me. And I also have a great thanks to the Department of International and European Studies at the University of Piraeus for this rewarding me with this prize. And now I think I want to just make 3 points about the current trend, a new trend about the studies about the international leadership. And first, we noted that after Trump came to power, and then the IR scholars and developed a common sense, the leadership matters. We have seen more and more writings, articles about this, and even like Kissinger write a book about leadership. And so what happened, just like the Professor Botsiou just said, and for quite a long time, especially from the 1970s, and when Walls and developed his structural realism, and scholars and heavily focus on the external factors like a power structure, like the even structure, a cultural structure, and the social norms, and they considering the external factors decided the policymakers' final decision, and instead of the policymaker themselves. From my understanding, actually before 1970s, IR scholars and also the other political scientists and spend a lot of effort on leadership study. For instance, my PhD advisor, Karl Rosberg, he published a book, A Personal Rule in Black Africa, and he did a study about how the different leadership and brought about different economic and social result to different African countries. And unfortunately, and because we have ignored the leadership for several decades, and Trump actually reminded everyone, he said that American institutions do not have that strong impact on foreign policy making. I can't do my decision by myself. Instead of get rid of, or at least partially, and avoid the constraint from the institutions, from social environment, from the international power structures. So the most typical case, and Trump distanced the relationship with the allies, mainly with the European allies. And so from then on, I think IR scholars have developed the common sense that, hey, possibly we should shift our focus from the external factors to the behaviors themselves. I mean, the policymakers themselves. Although the world has a huge population But all of us know that the world is not decided by the people, and not by the people like us, ordinary people. We cannot make a decision for the country. We cannot make a decision for the world. We cannot make a decision for the future. Our future, in some way, is in the hands of these leaders of great powers. They make the decision. They decide to go to war, like what we see in Ukraine. And it's not the people in that country, but it's the leaders. They decide to go to war. And also we find that some leaders do not have that kind of a preference for war. And so we noted that there's really a debate about whether Mr. Hammer is right or wrong. And Mr. Hammer said that he predicted the war in Ukraine for a long time ago. He's a structuralist. He predicts that from the structural perspective. So he concerned that as long as the major power feel threat from its neighbors, it will definitely use the force to get rid of that kind of threat from their neighbors, and specifically, and get rid of the danger for NATO to deploy strategic weapons in Ukraine, just like Kennedy, and refuse to accept the Russians' plan to deploy the weapons in Cuba. Actually, people forget the different results of these two crises. Kennedy settled down these disputes peacefully without launching a war. And Putin just did the opposite. Even from the structuralist perspective, and the purpose of saying, try to get rid of the potential threat of deployment of strategic weapons by the other major powers. But then they adopt a different strategy. So that's my understanding. It's not because the different scenario, different environment, different situation, different threats. It's because of a different leadership. That means, and Kennedy and the Putin are two different types of leadership. And if you look at record history, you can find that Kennedy is not only at that event, adopted a peaceful approach to settle down the conflicts with the Soviet Union. And Kennedy also want to end the Vietnam War, which launched by his previous American leaders. And also, according to the current research, and Kennedy was assassinated because of what? Because he wanted to stop the war. He wanted to get the troops out of the Vietnam. So now this case and illustrate that the important role of the leadership and in the same situation, in the same power structure, in the same international environment. Okay, this is the first point. The second point, currently, the world also illustrating, the reality today, still illustrating where the future of a people is still decided by policymakers, by leaders, not by people themselves. So this is a kind of you find that most of the writings about the leadership in the last 2 or 3 years are very pessimistic. They find that first, we cannot find any country or any international institution can provide a qualified global leadership for the globalization of today. And we don't have this kind of the signal. That means because of a lack of this kind of qualified global leadership, then what it followed? It followed by deglobalization. deglobalization has becomes a main trend and replaced the globalization, which was boomed in the first 2 decades after the Cold War. So then we find that this deglobalization coincidentally with a new type of leaders. And these leaders of the major powers and indulged in the concept of economic security. No matter how different they are in terms of ideology, no matter how different they are in terms of political systems, then they all heavily stress economic security. When they indulge in the concept of economic security, they what? They adopted the policy actually to driving the deglobalization forward instead of make a U-turn back to globalization. We find that American adopted the small yard high fence strategy and mainly composed of the decoupling policies. And these policies definitely will isolate China from the Western world, but it also make limited Americans' cooperation with the rest of the world. Not talking about a security cooperation, even economic cooperation. American willingly to limit himself to the international cooperation with as less country as possible. All of this small yard club, only with a few members, like US, Japan, and Korea, Taiwan, and like the cooperation between US, like a Quad with US and the UK and Australia, and like there even the the caucus with the Indian, the caucus, right? The Quad with the Indian, Japan, and Australia. So you see, most of these clubs, strategic clubs, with very few members. The reason is clear, and including Biden, they all fear about this international interdependence. They want to reduce the supply chain from cooperating with 100 countries to few countries as much as possible. Certainly, and in response to that, China also adopted dual circulations with the internal circulation as the core. And also this policy will reduce shorten the supply chains with the rest of the world. And the EU actually is the pillar or the base of a globalization after the Cold War. Then what? And this year, UN make the decision to establish intra-EU supply chains in food, energy, digital technology, and medicine, and the digital and also digital norms. So you see nowadays the leaders becomes less international oriented and becomes a very internal oriented leadership. So that's why you find that most of writings about the coming future, I mean in next 10 years, and very pessimistic. And you can hardly find anyone predicted we are going to have a bright future. We'll have a more free flow or world. And then this is a big problem. Third point. The third point that we are moving into a new age is called the digital age. The digital technology, from my understanding, and do not advance the world in the good direction. In some sense, the digital technology is a very, very unhuman, right? Technology is a very, very unhuman. And so it has driving the world towards a unprogressive direction. In some way, politically, it make the history and a step back. It's a retrogress has already happened. And I think the digital technology is making the leaders will adopt the foreign policy according to the needs of regime security rather than national security. So when major powers adopt their foreign policy according to the regime security, that means the policy is very, very changeable and unstable. And the reason is very simple, because the regime, the domestic politics is a transfer or the shifting much faster than international situation. It's much faster than international politics. Every individual country's domestic politics is a very, very unstable. I think digital technology in three perspectives strengthened or composed the threat to regime security. First is the social media. Social media can immediately form an anti-governmental opinion. And the public opinion can shift from supporting the government to against the government. So the government must pay attention to the society. They have to concern how the society and the public opinion change. Second, the digital technology and provide it's easier for foreign powers involved in one country's domestic politics through the internet. Like what we said, even Trump blamed his loss of the election because of the foreign intervention through the internet to the domestic politics. And also, when Trump won the election, the people, also the Democrats blame it's a Russian intervention and make Trump to win the election. Nowadays, you find that it's much easier for foreign powers to involve or interfere in other countries' international politics. So make the domestic situation is less stable and more threatening to the regime security. The third point is that the digital economy make the social polarization becomes bigger and bigger, worse and worse, and especially in industrialized countries. In these less developed countries, they have a very small share of the GDP as the digital economy. But for industrialized countries, the digital economy has already increased its share of the whole GDP. Unfortunately, digital economy make the rich much richer than the ordinary people. The digital economy do not make the poor even poor, but they do enlarge the gap, the wealth gap, much faster than before, and make the rich too rich. So this is human nature, and they may not hate their poverty, but they do hate the gap, and they do not want to see the unequal wealth among the people. So in Chinese saying, and in Chinese we say 不患寡而患不均. That means the rulers do not vary the limited resources, but he really vary the distribution is uneven. And because uneven distribution will cause what? Social turmoil. So in these three aspects, and the digital technology actually make the create more threats to regime security, and which are followed by what? By policymakers make foreign policy according to the needs of the regime security. So nowadays we find that there's one word becomes a very, very popular: uncertainty. What I mean uncertainty in international politics? That means that no one can sure or predict what the other country, what foreign policy the other countries will adopt. And no one trusts the other's foreign policy will continue. And the policy becomes less durable, becomes very unstable. Finally, I will say, and through my study, I regarded the leadership as independent variable. But then I have two problems with myself, with my own theory. First, the type of leadership. Just now we heard from the previous speeches, we heard that, and people use a different category or different standard to categorize the leadership. Like Kissinger and categorize the leadership in two types. I categorize the leadership in 4 types, and I even make a distinction between domestic leadership and international leadership. So this is a big theoretical problem for a scholar to deal with. How can we find a common criteria for categorize leadership? This is what we have to do in the future. The second problem with my theory is that, and because I regarded leadership as an independent variable, and then people will raise the question, how the different type of leadership formed up? That means only when we know how a type of leadership was formed, then we can know in what direction we can work. Try to make that kind of leadership or desirable leadership to hold the power, to avoid this disastrous leadership, and to hold the power both in the country and in the world. So I think that these two things and worth the further study in the coming days. And finally, once again, I would like to express my thanks to the support from the faculty members of the Department of International and European Studies at the University of Piraeus, and for this reward. And also, I greatly thank Professor Platias and Tziampiris and Botsiou for your participation and your arrangement of this activity. Thank you very much.
Professor Yan, thank you so much for a wonderful, wonderful talk, which there are a few things that I'd like to say. The first thing that strikes me, and I have to share with everyone straight away, is the fact that very rare for an academic, actually, is to be self-reflective and critical about aspects of his or her own theory. Usually you hear, this is why I'm right. This is a sign of true wisdom, and it has to be highlighted. Let me also say that since you began your talk, and maybe we can have a couple of questions and a little discussion before we end this, as I think befits this occasion. Professor Kenneth Walsh came to our university and gave his last major public talk here, and it's on YouTube with several of Greece's leading professors of IR, and he made some predictions as well, which is why it's very interesting. But I think you're very right when you say you have this more structural realism, maybe I wouldn't say totally deterministic, but structures sort of like move events. But then you have pushback. You had constructivism, ideas matter. We have your theory, leadership matters. We have to explain not just what is going on here, but how does structural realism explain the end of the Cold War, for example? So second level theories, first image theories come to the forefront. but structural realism is still around. So my question, is the following: within a structural framework, do you see a deterministic approach that actually cannot be explained? As you very eloquently said, Kennedy does one thing, Putin does another. It's the same type of thinking. Or could one say that reality is reality and leaders have the huge responsibility of reading it or not reading it correctly, making or not making right decisions, but that doesn't change the structure. It's just how they read the structure.
Okay. Well, actually, Walls is my professor, and I think actually he's I admire him as a god when I studied at Berkeley. You know, he's such famous leader. His theory is so powerful at that time. And actually, I never doubt, and his theory have some defects when I was at Berkeley. But after the Cold War, and not myself, I think many AI scholars to raise the question, hey, when Walls argue bipolar system is stable, how can this system, this power structure, end it so suddenly? If it's a stable system, it should be even changed. It takes a quite long time to change from the bipolar to either multipolar or the unipolar, right? Then people really question why the system, the structure suddenly changed. And actually, from then on, I also consider about this issue in that why the so-called détente during the Cold War is maintained by nuclear weapons or by the power structures. This is a serious issue. And second, the system, the bipolar structure is ended by Gorbachev's leadership or by some the material factors. So my personal view, if Gorbachev was not nominated as the leader of Soviet Union, they still have a leadership like Brezhnev, and is very conservative, do not want to reform, and I doubt the bipolar system will end it in 1992. So I think Gorbachev will play a crucial role. So whether it's policymakers have a different reading about the same power structure, my understanding is not the reading, whether they have a different reading. They possibly have two different things from policymakers in the same environment. First, they have a clear, same understanding of the external situation, but then they have a different purpose. Second, even they have a same purpose, they will prefer different strategy to achieve that purpose. So, generally speaking, that's my personal view. I don't think the people misread the international environment. This objective situation, for most people can see it, there's some nuance, but generally people agree with each other. For instance, this time, and it's not Putin misread the power structure between Russia and the NATO. It's because and Putin have a great confidence in himself to end the war within 7 days, because of his history, his personal history, tell him, you make the same thing and achieve the same goal in Chechen, and then in Georgia, and then in Crimea. So 3 times he can achieve this strategic goal through a very limited military actions. So he developed that kind of a confidence. So his overconfidence in himself and lead him make this decision that, okay, I prefer to use a military force to settle down the disputes rather than looking for the peaceful solution. That's my understanding. So this is still is an analysis from the aspects of the leadership. And regarding to this question, I will say, and I do not deny the impact of the power structure on policy making. And for instance, and Putin make the decision and to deal and the Kennedy make the decision to try to get rid of the possible deployment of strategic weapons among in their neighbors. But how about the other countries? I don't think Cambodia have this kind of thinking, and Vietnam or even some other middle countries have the idea. I cannot not allow my neighbors have deployed strategic weapons from my enemy. And so this means the power structure still plays a role in what? In their judgment about their basic security interests. And because the power structure make the Russia feel, hey, I'm a big power, so I cannot tolerate this kind of military deployment. But let's think, if Russia's military capability and means military power structure between US, Russia, and NATO, like the Canada, do Canada have that kind of ambition? That okay, I cannot allow the US deploy nuclear weapons? Certainly not. So now I say, was the theory still makes sense, but it makes sense only for defining objective interests, but it cannot decide adopting what kind of a policy to achieve that interest. So from my understanding, what theory is not absolutely wrong. It's only just over applied to too much the fields.
Thank you very much for your really succinct answer. And before I pass on the floor to Professor Botsiou, Professor Platias gets the last word, of course. I'd like to share with you, since we talked a little bit about Kenneth Walsh, something that I found very interesting. When he was here in Piraeus, we had lunch with him. I think it was Professor Platias who asked him, so while you were writing Theory of International Politics, what were you reading? And his answer, we did not expect it coming. He said, I was primarily reading Plato. Something to think about and what connections, because he's not cited in the book, but he said, that's what I was reading, Plato. Now the floor goes to Professor Botsiou and then Professor Platias.
Thank you very much. Well, as he was reading Plato, I think he got a lot of ideas about ideas. As a historian of political history, I could not agree more with you, Professor Yan, regarding the role of leadership in changing the course of history. Although history has its own laws sometimes. So this is why we say that history does not repeat itself, but human psychology may repeat itself. Now, I would like to go back to your moral realism theory. You connect a reform at home with international legitimacy, if I'm not wrong. I would like to go one step behind and say that we see that different countries and different systems have different ways of selecting leaders. Some countries, like the US and Western democracies, connect reform with changing leaders. Other systems, other countries, including China, believe that reform comes from stability, internal stability, and from not changing leaders for a long period of time. Both systems pursue international legitimacy. Do you believe that this is the ultimate conflict today in regard with ideas? That actually, in the end, we'll see which system deserves or earns international legitimacy? The system that selects leaders, or the system that does not select leaders for a long period of time, or has a different time of selecting leaders, to be more precise?
Okay. Well, I think this is a very good question and very catching. And first, I think the people have a different kind of definitions for legitimacy. From my understanding, in most cases, people define legitimacy as a process, whether the process, especially election of a leader, according to required regulations or norms. If it is inconsistent with that regulation, people regard it as a legitimate. If it's not inconsistent with that, it will be regarded as a non-legitimate. The second definition for the legitimacy is not the only process, but also including the result. That means you selected, the leader selected through a process which brings a good result rather than the disaster. If it's inconsistent with the norms or regulations, but leading to disaster, people still regard it as a less a legitimacy. This is a very typical case in China. You know, in the last 2,000 years, and the emperors always have a few children. According to the norm or regulation, the elder son is the only successor. He has the legitimacy to success the power, but not the other child. And especially the elder son should be born by his wife instead of his concubine. And unfortunately, the wife not always gave birth to a boy, or not always give birth to a clever boy. And then the concubine may have a boy much clever, much capable than the elder son. So then you find that there's an internal struggle in the court about what is legitimate. Elect a capable person or elect the elder son. So from my understanding today, especially in China, the same. And people still argue that what means legitimacy? That means they can bring a good result. So if the leader cannot bring a good result, no matter what process he went through the election, and people don't think it is legitimate. And actually, from my understanding, this kind of situation also happened in the US. Now, still, even today, still a lot of people said that, hey, the Biden is not legitimate because of the election is not this or that kind of reason. Actually, this kind of debate is not whether it's inconsistent with the process or the regulation, but whether we have a real capable person. Let's imagine if Biden came, after Biden came power in the last 2 years, he make the economy grow faster than China. He make the economy, to make the unemployment much lower than Trump. He make the middle class in the US becomes richer. Do people will challenge about the legitimacy of his election? People will forget it. And so from my understanding now, and we really should consider, even for the world, for the global leadership. And from my understanding, we need a qualified leadership. It doesn't mean that that global leadership and is what is legally consistent with a norm, but it must, that's my view, it has the capability bring back globalization.
Thank you very much. And Professor Platias, I'm really awaiting to see where your question is, what area you're going to cover in your...
Well, let me make a comment first. I was delighted by this discussion. I mean, Professor Yan made clearly the point in his presentation for why he was selected for this award. He brought leadership back. He brought it back big way. You see, historians through the centuries always claimed that leaders shape the policies of their countries, including foreign and security policies. That's nothing new. But you see, Professor Yan moved one step further. He said leaders as an independent variable not only shape the policies of their countries, but they shape the international system. When the structural theory said only distribution of power shapes international outcomes like war and peace. And Professor Yan concentrates on the power differential. And then he asks, who is creating this power differential? And it's leadership. If there is a revolutionary or reformist leader, can create the preconditions that the power of one state can grow faster and over time can create international, can change the international distribution of power. This is precisely what Themistocles did. Themistocles is actually the case study of his theory. He created not only the material element of powers, of Athenian power, also the strategy and the know-how of seamanship, but created the momentum. And this momentum created the Athenian Empire, and the Athenian Empire became stronger and changed the distribution of power in the Greek world. And also in the Eastern Mediterranean. I mean, Athens became an empire that could see eye to eye the Persian Empire. And of course, it changed the distribution within the Greek state, that Athens became stronger than Sparta. And current theorists like Professor Allison try to take all this dynamic that we just explained and talk about the Thucydides trap and the inevitability of war, especially among the great powers like US and China. I would like Professor Yan to comment how he sees this kind of theories that based on inevitability, based mostly on structural trends.
I found that now the IR theories is try to go back to the classical realism. And more and more scholars realize that classical realism has a lot of shining thought, have not fully developed. And in some way, and my theory, moral realism is partially and agree with the classical realism or based on the classical realism. So I think we should do more to further rediscover from the classical realism. And just now, Vasily suggested me talking about something about the Themistocles. Actually, I did the comparative study between Xun and the cordially and Indian's philosopher and the Indian's strategies. I think Themistocles, as a Greece hero or Greece leader, he must share a lot of common characteristics with those leaders in other countries. So, for instance, and in China, we have some leaders and who actually win the war or the battle and in a disadvantaged position. So I think if the Greek scholars or the Chinese scholars have knowledge about the Greek culture or history, they can do some comparative study between Themistocles with the Chinese historical figures. I think if they can do that, they can do two things. At first, the most important, try to find common characteristics shared by them, because they have no connection, no communication, no contact. How can they behave the same way? So this kind of behavior must be universal, have a universal meaning in it. This is what I should do. The second part.
Absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, the two Themistocles difference from that Chinese figure to see whether this difference caused by culture or by individuals' history or by their education. So only they find this difference, they can tell, hey, possibly it's not a cultural difference. It's different of education. maybe it's not different education difference. It's because of the different family background. You know, in the traditional society, family education is much more important than the school education on these historical figures. So I think that this kind of study can discover a lot of universal phenomena.
Professor Yan, I think you reminded everyone in our audience today that classical realism is not just Western, but it's much more global. And
Yes.
I think Professor Platias, we're thinking, and I were thinking the same thing. This is something, a conference or a book in the making, something to pursue. And I think that's a very important, this has been partly forgotten. And as you said, a lot of aspects of classical realism have to be rediscovered. Could not agree more. This has been wonderful, a true symposium in the ancient sense, so an exchange of thoughts. It has been a distinct honor for us, first and foremost. And let me just conclude this by saying we talked about leadership, foresight, being prudent, looking ahead. So I would like to announce that in preparation and reading how we should work as a department, I'd like to announce now publicly the next recipient of the Themistocles Award. It will be Victor Davis Hanson for his work in ancient military analysis from the Hoover Institute from Stanford University. And it's going to take place, we expect, let's hope the pandemic doesn't come back, in May 2023. Professor Yan, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aris, I hope we will have Professor Yan here in Piraeus and enjoy this type of symposia and talking about the universality of strategy across cultures and across ages.
Well,
It would be our pleasure.
It's my pleasure if I can have the chance to visit your country and your university. I hope that the COVID-19 can be end as early as possible, and so make the trip to your country available next year. Thank you very much for all your efforts and for your
Wonderful.
reward.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.